I'm Margaret Sterling, 81, a woman, and my son cut me off to please his wife, believing my silence and isolation would break me. They thought that if they left me alone long enough in this big, quiet house, I would crumble like the old bricks in the garden wall. They saw my age as a weakness, my love as a lever, and my memories as junk to be cleared out. They laughed behind my back, secure in their belief that they were the future and I was the past. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot that this old house and this old woman were built by the same man, my late husband David, and he never built anything that was meant to fall. They stayed silent, waiting for me to surrender. So I stayed silent too and waited for the truth to do its work. My life before the quiet set in was measured by simple joys. The first ray of sun finding the dust motes dancing over the living room rug. The weight of a warm mug of tea in my hands as I sat in the breakfast nook looking out at the dew-soaked lawn. The methodical pleasure of tending to my roses, their velvet petals a testament to a life of patient cultivation. This house, a sprawling but gentle country home of fieldstone and dark timber, wasn't just a structure. It was a living album of my 60 years with David. He had designed it himself, sketching it on napkins at the little diner where we had our first date. Every stone held an echo of his laughter, every creaking floorboard a memory of our children's footsteps. After David passed 10 years ago, the house grew quieter, but it was never empty. It was filled with him. Our son Arthur was our only child. David and I poured everything we had into him, our love, our values, our hopes. When he was a boy, he had his father's kind eyes and an easy smile. He loved the stories I'd read him, his small hand tucked in mine. But as he grew older, a different hunger began to stir in him, one we didn't recognize. It was a hunger for more, for better, for shinier. It was a hunger that his wife, Brenda, was only too happy to feed. Brenda entered our lives like a brisk, cold wind. She was all sharp angles and sharper ambition. She saw the Sterling name not as a legacy of hard work and integrity, but as a brand. Our family history was to her a collection of assets to be appraised and liquidated. The conflict began subtly, with small skirmishes over taste and tradition. I remember the first time I realized the depth of her disregard for anything that wasn't new and expensive. It was about the old grandfather clock that stood in our foyer. It was a wedding gift to my own grandparents, its deep, sonorous chime marking the passage of our family's life for over a century. One Sunday, Arthur and Brenda were visiting, and Brenda stood tapping her acrylic nail against its polished mahogany case. "Maggie," she'd said, never calling me Mom or even Margaret, "this thing is so gloomy, it takes up so much space." We saw the most stunning minimalist piece online, all chrome and glass. It would modernize this entryway instantly. You could probably get a pretty penny for this old thing from an antique dealer. Arthur, standing beside her, just nodded. "She has a point, Mom. It's about looking forward, not back." I looked from my son's face to the clock. I remembered him as a little boy, standing on his tiptoes to watch the golden pendulum swing, his face filled with wonder. Now that wonder was gone, replaced by a dull, acquisitive sheen in his eyes. "The clock stays, Brenda," I said, my voice softer than I intended, but just as firm. "It isn't a thing, it's our family's heartbeat." Brenda's smile was tight, a little rip in her pleasant facade. She saw my love for my history as a stubborn refusal to get with her program. It wasn't the last time. Another instance that stands out was a Thanksgiving dinner a few years ago. I spent days preparing, making all of Arthur's childhood favorites from scratch: the sage and apple stuffing, the cranberry sauce with just a hint of orange zest, the pumpkin pie from a recipe my own mother had taught me. Arthur and Brenda arrived 2 hours late, breezing in with a flimsy excuse about traffic. Brenda surveyed the dining table, laden with food and love, and gave a little sigh. "Oh, Maggie, you went to all this trouble," she said, her tone suggesting I'd done something foolish. "So much butter and cream. We're trying to eat clean these days. Did you not get the organic, gluten-free dessert I had sent over?" She gestured to a small, sad-looking box on the sideboard, which I'd politely ignored. During the meal, she picked at her food and spoke loudly about their recent trip to a Michelin-starred restaurant where the chef had deconstructed a squash into a puff of foam. Arthur, once the boy who could eat 3 helpings of my pie, just pushed his food around his plate and agreed with everything she said. They were a team, and I was the quaint, outdated obstacle to their sleek, modern life. But His most painful pattern was the one involving money. Arthur had a knack for finding once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunities that always seemed to coincide with a sudden, urgent need for capital. He wouldn't call for weeks, not to ask how I was, not to share a piece of news. The phone would ring and I'd feel a foolish leap of hope, and then I'd hear his voice, smooth and practiced. "Mom, how are you? Listen, a fantastic deal just came across my desk." He'd talk about market trends and portfolios, words that meant little to me. What I heard was the unspoken part: I need money. David had been a shrewd but generous man, and he'd left us more than comfortable. Arthur knew this. He and Brenda lived a life far beyond their own means, a life of country clubs, European cars, and designer clothes, all propped up by the foundation David had built. He'd forgotten that the foundation was built of stone and hard work, not just endless cash. He'd call to ask for a loan on the anniversary of his father's death, completely oblivious to the date, his mind only on the bottom line. And I foolishly would often give in, telling myself I was helping him, supporting his ambition. I see now I wasn't supporting his ambition, I was funding his and Brenda's greed, and with every check I wrote, I was devaluing the very love and memory he was taking for granted. These were not isolated incidents. They were chapters in a long, slow story of alienation. A story of a son drifting away from the shore of his upbringing, pulled by the tide of a woman who valued currency over character. I saw it all, but I held on, hoping the boy with the kind eyes was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the expensive suits and the easy compliance. I was wrong. The boy was gone, and the man he'd become was about to make it devastatingly clear. The day it all shattered began like any other Tuesday in May. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming lilac from the bushes by the porch. I had spent the morning in the garden, my old wicker basket filled with weeds, my hands caked in the rich, dark earth that David had always called the source of everything. I felt a sense of peace, a quiet satisfaction in the simple, honest work. It was around noon when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. I didn't recognize the sound. My friends, the few that were still around, always called before visiting. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked around the side of the house. A sleek silver sedan, a model I didn't recognize but which radiated an aura of obscene expense, was parked near the front steps. And then they emerged. Arthur looking uncomfortable in a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, and Brenda in a crisp white pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, intimidating style. In her hand, she held a bouquet of cellophane-wrapped carnations, the kind you buy out of obligation at a gas station. My heart gave a painful little squeeze. It had been nearly 4 months since I'd last seen them, 4 months of silence. And now here they were, unannounced. A part of me, the stubborn, foolish mother part, felt a flicker of hope. Maybe they missed me, maybe they were here to apologize. "Mom," Arthur said, his voice straining to sound cheerful. "We were in the area, thought we'd surprise you." "A surprise indeed," I said, forcing a small smile. "You should have called, I would have baked something." "Oh, don't be silly, Maggie," Brenda said, gliding forward and thrusting the bouquet at me. The cellophane crinkled aggressively. "We can't stay long, we have a 2 o'clock meeting." She scanned the porch, her eyes lingering on a patch of peeling paint on a railing. I could feel her judgment like a physical chill. I led them inside, into the living room that felt suddenly small and shabby under Brenda's critical gaze. I offered them tea, which they refused. They sat together on the sofa opposite my armchair, a united front. They looked less like family paying a visit and more like a hostile negotiating team. The small talk was excruciating. They asked about my health in a vague, dismissive way. Brenda complimented a painting on the wall, a lovely landscape David and I had bought on a trip to Vermont, by asking what it might be worth. The air grew thick with unspoken intentions. Finally, after a long, awkward silence, Arthur cleared his throat, the signal that the real performance was about to begin. "Mom," he started, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Brenda and I have been talking, and we're worried about you." I felt my spine stiffen. "Worried? I'm perfectly fine, Arthur." "Are you, though?" Brenda chimed in, her voice dripping with counterfeit concern. "This is a huge house for one person, the upkeep alone, and you're not getting any younger. What if you fell? What if something happened? No one would know for days." "I have my phone," I said calmly, "and Mrs. Gable from next door checks on me." "A phone isn't enough." Arthur pressed on. "We've been looking into some options for your safety, for your comfort." He reached into his expensive leather briefcase and pulled out a glossy brochure, sliding it onto the coffee table between us. The cover showed a group of silver-haired seniors laughing, playing shuffleboard on a pristine, unnaturally green lawn. The name was written in a cheerful, swooping font, Golden Vistas Senior Living. I stared at the brochure. It looked like a luxury prison. "A retirement home," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "It's not a home, Maggie, it's a lifestyle community," Brenda corrected me instantly. "It has round-the-clock medical staff, gourmet dining, social activities. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. We would handle everything." "Handle everything," I echoed, my gaze lifting from the brochure to their expectant faces. This was Arthur's cue for the final act. He reached back into the briefcase and pulled out a sheaf of papers held together with a binder clip. He placed them on top of the brochure. "This would make it all much simpler," he said, his voice low and serious. "It's a power of attorney. It would allow me to manage your finances, your estate, to make the transition to Golden Vistas seamless. It's just a formality to make sure you're taken care of." There it was, the real reason for the visit. The carnations, the fake concern, the glossy brochure, it was all just window dressing for this stack of papers. They didn't want to take care of me. They wanted to take control of what I had. They wanted to pack me away in a clean, convenient box so they could get their hands on the house, the money, the trust my husband had so carefully built. They wanted to liquidate my life. I looked at the documents, then at my son. I searched his face for a flicker of the boy I once knew, a hint of shame or doubt. I found nothing. There was only a strained, impatient eagerness. He wasn't seeing his mother. He was seeing a problem that needed to be managed, an asset that needed to be unlocked. I took a slow, deep breath, the scent of lilac and damp earth from my clothes filling my lungs. I folded my hands in my lap. "No," I said, my voice didn't tremble. It was as solid as the stone foundation beneath my feet. Arthur blinked. "No, Mom, be reasonable." "I am being perfectly reasonable," I replied, my eyes meeting his. "This house is my home. It is where your father and I built our life. It is where he died. I am not leaving it. And I am perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. I will not be signing those papers." A beat of stunned silence. The ambush had failed, and now the civility was about to end. The moment the word "no" left my lips, the atmosphere in the room changed. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging us from the dim twilight of false concern into the stark, ugly darkness of their true intentions. Brenda's mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Her carefully constructed expression of sympathy curdled into unconcealed contempt. "Reasonable?" she scoffed, her voice a sharp, jagged thing. "You think it's reasonable to live in a dusty, oversized museum when you can't even climb the stairs without wheezing? We're trying to help you, Maggie, and you're being stubborn and selfish." Selfish, the word struck me with a physical force. "This is my home, Brenda. Asking me to leave it is not help, it's an eviction." "Oh, for heaven's sake," she snapped, standing up and beginning to pace in the small space between the sofa and the fireplace. This isn't just about you, it's about the assets. This house is a massive, illiquid asset that's doing nothing but costing money in taxes and upkeep. It needs to be sold. Your portfolio needs to be managed by someone with a modern financial strategy, not just left to stagnate. I turned my gaze to Arthur. He was still sitting, but he wouldn't look at me. He was staring at his own expensive shoes as if they held the answers to the universe. "Arthur," I prompted, my voice quiet but firm, "is this what you believe, that my life is an illiquid asset?" He finally looked up, and the weakness I saw in his eyes was more damning than any rage. He was a puppet, and Brenda was pulling the strings. "Mom, you're not listening," he said, his voice taking on a whiny, petulant tone that I hadn't heard since he was a teenager. "Brenda's right. We have a plan that will secure your future and ours. You're being emotional. You're not thinking clearly." Not thinking clearly. I felt a cold anger begin to rise within me, a feeling so foreign it was almost unrecognizable. "I am thinking more clearly now than I have in years. I see exactly what this is. You don't want to take care of me. You want to take control. You want to put me away so you can sell my home, sell my memories, and use the money to fund your extravagant life." Brenda let out a short, bitter laugh. "Her memories," she said to the room as if I wasn't there. "She thinks we care about a bunch of old photographs and chipped china. The world has moved on, Maggie. It's about wealth management and strategic growth, things you wouldn't understand." "I understand that my husband worked his entire life to build this family a secure future," I shot back, my voice rising for the first time. "A future built on integrity, not on selling off your own mother." That hit a nerve. Arthur flinched, and his face flushed a deep, mottled red. "That's not fair," he yelled, finally finding some energy. "We're trying to be responsible. Do you have any idea the kind of pressure I'm under? The circles we move in, it takes money to maintain our position." "Your position?" I asked, aghast. "Your position as what? As a man who would trade his mother's happiness for a new car or a country club membership?" The argument devolved from there. It was no longer a conversation, but a volley of insults and accusations. Brenda accused me of being a martyr, of trying to manipulate them with guilt. Arthur accused me of not trusting him, of always favoring his father. Every word was designed to wound, to break me down, to make me feel small and incompetent. They circled me like vultures, their words pecking away at my resolve. Brenda stopped her pacing and stood before me, looking down her nose. "You know, Arthur and I were talking on the way over here," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper. "We knew you'd be like this. It's a classic sign of cognitive decline, clinging to the past, paranoia, irrational decision-making. You probably don't even realize you're doing it." That was the cruelest cut. To have my love for my life, my home, my husband's memory diagnosed as a symptom of senility. To have my mind, the one thing I still held as inviolably mine, dismissed as broken. I stood up then, my old bones aching but my spine ramrod straight. I was suddenly taller than them, or at least I felt it. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, but it filled the room. Arthur looked stunned. "What?" "You heard me. Get out of my house. The discussion is over. The answer is no. It will always be no." Brenda grabbed her purse, her face a mask of fury. "Fine," she spat. "Fine, have it your way. Stay here and rot in this old museum, but don't come crying to us when you fall and break a hip. Don't expect us to come running." She turned to Arthur. "Let's go, Arthur. We're done here. She's made her choice." Arthur hesitated, a flicker of something. Was it guilt, regret, crossing his face? He looked at me, then at his wife, then back at me. It was the moment of truth, the moment he would choose. He chose her. He straightened his tie and walked towards the door, not looking at me. At the threshold he paused, his back still to me. "Don't call us, Mom," he said, his voice flat and cold. "We won't be answering. When you're ready to be reasonable, you know where the papers are." Then they were gone. The front door slammed shut with a dreadful finality, the sound echoing through the house. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, listening to the sound of their expensive car starting, the crunch of the gravel as they sped away, leaving a cloud of dust and silence in their wake. The silence they left behind was different. It wasn't the peaceful, companionable silence I shared with David's memory. It was a hostile, gaping void. I sank back into my armchair, the glossy brochure for golden vistas mocking me from the coffee table. My body trembled, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in my hands and spread through my entire being. The house, my sanctuary, suddenly felt vast and terrifyingly empty. The world I had known, the family I had built, had just been declared null and void. They had cut the cord. And in the deafening silence, a single, horrifying thought screamed in my mind: they had left me here to die. The first few days after they left were a blur of disorienting quiet. I moved through the rooms of my house like a ghost, my own footsteps startlingly loud on the hardwood floors. The slam of the front door had created a vacuum, and now the silence rushed in to fill it, pressing in on me from all sides. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The telephone on the hall table, once a source of potential connection, became a black, menacing object. I would stare at it, willing it to ring, while simultaneously dreading that it might, but it remained silent. They were true to their word. The nights were the worst. I would lie in the large bed that David and I had shared for over 50 years and feel the vast emptiness of the space beside me more acutely than ever. Sleep offered little escape, as my dreams were haunted by distorted versions of Arthur's face, his eyes cold and distant, and Brenda's mocking laughter echoing in the background. I would wake with a start, my heart pounding, the cruel words they had hurled at me replaying in my mind. Rot in this museum. Cognate. Decline, selfish. The words became the new inhabitants of the house, whispering from every corner. I lost my appetite. The thought of cooking a meal for one seemed pointless and pathetic. I subsisted on tea and toast, the motions of preparing even that simple fare feeling robotic. I'd wander into the garden, my sanctuary, but the vibrant colors of the roses and peonies seemed muted, as if the world itself had turned gray. I would sit on the old stone bench, David's bench, and try to feel his presence, but my grief was a thick fog, obscuring even my most cherished memories. I felt utterly and completely alone, discarded. I was an old piece of furniture they no longer had room for, left on the curb for the trash collectors. One rainy afternoon, I found myself in Arthur's old bedroom. I hadn't touched it much over the years. His childhood books were still on the shelf, his collection of model airplanes still hanging from the ceiling. I ran my hand over the scarred surface of his old wooden desk where he used to do his homework. I remembered sitting here with him, patiently explaining long division, his small brow furrowed in concentration. Where had that boy gone? How had the sweet, curious child I raised become the cold, calculating man who had walked out of my life? I sank onto the edge of his bed, the springs groaning in protest. The grief I had been holding at bay finally broke through. It wasn't a gentle sadness, it was a raw, physical agony. A sob tore from my throat, a sound of such profound heartbreak that it scared me. I was mourning my son as surely as if he had died. In a way, he had. The son I loved, the son who had loved me, was gone. A stranger with his face had taken his place. In that room, surrounded by the ghosts of a happier time, I let myself feel the full weight of the betrayal. It wasn't just about the house or the money, it was the casual cruelty of it. The way they had weaponized my age, my love, my very mind against me. The way Arthur had stood by and let Brenda tear me to shreds, his silence a form of active participation in my humiliation. I remembered a conversation with David years ago when Arthur had just started his first high-paying job. We were sitting on the porch watching the fireflies. "He has a good heart, Maggie," David had said, his voice thoughtful, "but it's easily swayed by shiny things. Brenda is the shiniest thing he's ever seen. We have to trust that the foundation we gave him is strong enough to hold." His words, meant to be reassuring then, were a dagger now. The foundation hadn't held. It had crumbled under the weight of Brenda's ambition and Arthur's weakness. For a week, maybe more, I let that despair consume me. I felt my energy draining away, my will to fight flickering like a dying candle. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps I should just give up, sign the papers, and let myself be stored away. The loneliness was a physical pain, a constant ache in my chest. It felt like it would be easier to surrender than to endure it. I was 81 years old. What did I have left to fight for? One morning, I woke up and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. Her eyes were hollow, her skin pale and papery, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked old, not just her age, but truly old in the way that meant worn out, used up. And in that moment, seeing that pathetic, defeated woman, a different feeling sparked within me. It wasn't hope, not yet, it was anger. A slow, hot, cleansing anger. How dare they do this to me? How dare they try to erase my life, my history, my very identity, and make me believe I was the one at fault? David didn't build this house, this life, for it to end this way. He didn't raise a son to discard his own mother like garbage. The foundation David built wasn't in Arthur. It was in me. It was in this house. It was in the 60 years of love and partnership we had shared. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my loneliness would be my undoing. But what if it could be my strength? In the silence, I could finally hear my own thoughts without the noise of their demands and judgments. In the loneliness, I could rediscover who I was without them. The shift inside me was not a sudden earthquake, but the slow, powerful turn of a tectonic plate. The anger had burned away the fog of despair, leaving a stark, clear landscape. I was still alone, but I was no longer adrift. I had found my footing on the solid ground of my own worth. My first act of defiance was small, almost laughably so, but it felt momentous. I went out to the garden. Brenda had always called my love for gardening a filthy hobby. She couldn't understand the joy of plunging your hands into the cool earth, of nurturing a tiny seed into a glorious bloom. To her, it was just dirt. But to me, it was creation. It was life. I spent the entire day on my knees, my old joints complaining, but my spirit sorry. NG, I pulled weeds with a vengeance, yanking out the intrusive chickweed and dandelions as if I were ripping out the memory of their cruel words. I pruned the roses, snipping away the dead and dying branches to make way for new growth. I watered and fed the soil. My hands were caked in mud, my back ached, and I had never felt better. By the end of the day, as I looked at the tidy beds and vibrant blossoms, I felt a sense of order restored, not just in the garden, but in myself. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since they left. I cooked a proper meal, a small roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots from my own garden. I set the table in the dining room with one of my good linen tablecloths and a single, perfect rose from the garden as a centerpiece. I ate alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was in the company of my own resilience. The next morning, I made the phone call. My hand was steady as I picked up the receiver and dialed the number from memory. It was the number for Charles Blackwood. Charles had been more than just my husband's financial advisor. He had been David's best friend since they were boys. He was a kind, sharp, fiercely loyal man with a no-nonsense demeanor that I had always found comforting. After David died, Charles had managed my affairs with quiet competence, but I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a year, having no real need. Now I needed him, not just for his financial acumen, but for his connection to David, to the life that Arthur and Brenda were trying to erase. "Margaret," he answered, his voice a familiar, warm baritone. "What a pleasant surprise. Is everything all right?" "Charles, I need to see you," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I need to review everything, all of it. David's will, the trust, my own accounts. I need to get my affairs in perfect order." I paused, then added with a touch of dry irony that felt like a victory in itself, "just in case they were right and I am losing my mind." Charles was at my house within the hour. He walked in, his shrewd, kind eyes taking in the room, then me. He saw past the polite smile I offered him and straight into the heart of things. He gave me a gentle hug, his embrace solid and reassuring. "Tell me what happened, Maggie," he said, sitting in the armchair opposite me, the same one I had sat in during the ambush. And so I told him everything. The unannounced visit, the brochure for Golden Vistas, the power of attorney documents, the cruel words, the mocking laughter, the final, cold ultimatum. I spoke without tears, my voice even and steady. I laid out the facts of their betrayal like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. As I spoke, I watched Charles's expression change. His initial look of concern hardened into a steely, quiet rage. His knuckles were white where he gripped the arms of the chair. When I finished, he was silent for a long time, his jaw tight. "The cowardly, greedy little whelps," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "David would be, I don't even have the words for what David would be." He shook his head slowly. "To do this to you, to his own mother." "They believe I am weak, Charles," I said. "They believe I am helpless and alone, and that sooner or later I will break and give them what they want." He looked me straight in the eye, and I saw a flicker of the old fire that had made him such a formidable friend and advisor. "Well," he said, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face, "we're just going to have to prove them wrong, aren't we?" In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally, a connection to my past and a partner for my future. The glimmer of strength I had found in the garden had now become a steady flame. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had just begun. Charles wasted no time. The very next day, he arrived with 2 large, heavy briefcases filled with files. "Time to go to war, Maggie," he said with a grim cheerfulness as he set them down on my large oak dining table. For the next week, that table became our command center. We pored over documents for hours each day, deeds, bank statements, investment portfolios, and most importantly, the thick, leather-bound folder that contained the details of the Sterling family trust. At first, it was overwhelming. The language was dense, filled with legal and financial jargon that swam before my eyes. But Charles was a patient and brilliant translator. He walked me through every line, every clause, explaining the intricacies of the financial empire that David had built, not with reckless speculation, but with careful, deliberate intelligence. As he explained, my understanding grew, and with it, a deeper appreciation for my husband's foresight. David hadn't just been building wealth, he had been building a fortress to protect our family. "David was a genius, Maggie," Charles said one afternoon, tapping a finger on a page of stock holdings. "He wasn't a gambler, he was a gardener just like you. He planted seeds in solid, reliable companies and he tended them for decades. He diversified, he hedged, he built this to last." As we delved deeper, a picture of Arthur and Brenda's financial recklessness began to emerge. Charles pulled Arthur's account statements, which as a secondary trustee he had access to. We saw the constant, lavish spending. The charges from 5-star hotels, designer boutiques, exclusive golf clubs. We saw the car lease payments that were more than most people's mortgages. And we saw the loans. A series of smaller, high-interest loans taken out against his projected income. And then the big one. "Here it is," Charles said, his voice grim. He pushed a document across the table. It was a loan agreement from a major national bank. The principal amount made me gasp. It was a staggering sum, enough to buy a fleet of luxury cars. The collateral listed was anticipated inheritance and assets held within the Sterling family trust. The purpose of the loan was listed as real estate acquisition and development. "Their mansion," I breathed, understanding. "The one Brenda is always showing off in those society magazines." "The very one," Charles confirmed. He used the family name and the trust's reputation to secure a loan that no sensible banker should have ever approved. But here's the kicker. He pointed to a section detailing the repayment terms. It was a balloon mortgage. The monthly payments were deceptively low, covering only the interest. But at the end of a 7-year term, the entire principal, the massive, terrifying sum, was due in one single payment. I looked at the date the loan was originated, then I did the math in my head. "Charles," I said, my heart beginning to beat a little faster, "the 7-year term is almost up. It's due in 3 months." "Precisely," Charles said, his eyes gleaming with a fierce light. "They must have assumed that by now they would have full control of your assets, that they could simply absorb the debt into the main trust or sell this house to cover it. They've been living on borrowed time and borrowed money, all while laughing at the very woman whose signature is their only lifeline." That's when he opened the leather-bound folder for the Sterling Family Trust and turned to a specific tabbed page. "David and I worked on this for a long time," he said softly. He was worried about Arthur, even back then, worried about his weakness for the shiny things. He wanted to ensure that the family's wealth was used to support character, not to enable corruption. He called this his moral compass clause. He slid the document in front of me and pointed to a paragraph marked in faint pencil. Clause 12b. I read the words, and as I did, the full scope of my husband's wisdom, his love, his incredible foresight washed over me. The clause stated in clear, unambiguous legal language that any extraordinary distribution from the trust principal to a beneficiary, such as a sum required to pay off a massive debt, was not automatic. It required the active and willing consent in writing of the surviving primary trustee. That was me. But it was the next sentence that took my breath away. That consent was expressly contingent upon the trustee's confirmation of the beneficiary's adherence to the family's core values, and most importantly, on the primary trustee's continued well-being, happiness, and respected status within the family. My signature wasn't just a legal mechanism, it was a testament. A sworn statement that my son was treating me with the love and respect I was due, a statement that I was happy and well. David had left me the ultimate protection. He had tied the family fortune directly to my family's decency. Arthur and Brenda, in their greed and arrogance, had built their entire glittering, hollow life on a foundation of sand, never bothering to read the blueprints. They thought they were holding all the cards, but my late husband had dealt me the only one that mattered. I looked up from the page and met Charles's gaze. He saw the resolve in my eyes. He knew what I was going to do, which was, of course, nothing at all. My silence, which they had imposed on me as a punishment, was now my most powerful weapon. My inaction would be the force that brought their house of cards tumbling down. "They cut me off, Charles," I said, my voice quiet but filled with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "They told me not to call, so I will honor their request." "And when the bank comes calling for them," he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then they will discover, as I have, that my signature is not for sale," I replied. "It must be earned." A slow, satisfied smile spread across Charles's face. "David would be so damn proud of you, Maggie," he said. "The war room was closed. All we had to do now was wait for the inevitable surrender." The next 3 months were perhaps the most peaceful I had experienced in years. The heavy, oppressive silence that had once haunted the house transformed into a serene quietude. It was the silence of confidence, of a decision made and a path chosen. I tended my garden, I read books, I reconnected with old friends. I hosted a small luncheon for the ladies in my bridge club. I lived my life not as a victim waiting for the other shoe to drop, but as the master of my own home, secure in my own skin. I never once looked at the phone with dread or anticipation. I simply let it be. The call came on a crisp autumn morning. I was arranging a bouquet of late-blooming chrysanthemums when the phone rang, its shrill sound an alien intrusion into my tranquil world. I looked at the caller ID. It was Arthur. I let it ring 4 times, then picked up the receiver. "Hello," I said, my voice calm and neutral. Mom, thank God." His voice was a frantic, high-pitched squeak stripped of all its usual smoothness. Panic was pouring off him in waves. "Mom, you've got to help us. The banque, they're calling in the loan, the whole thing. They're giving us 30 days or they're going to foreclose." I was silent for a moment, listening to his ragged breathing. "I see," I said simply. "You see, is that all you can say?" he shrieked. "We're going to lose everything, the house, everything we've worked for. We need you to come to the bank with us. There are papers you need to sign to release the funds from the trust. It's the only way." "My signature," I said, my voice still even. "You need my signature." "Yes, of course, we'll pick you up in an hour." He was already making plans, assuming my compliance. "No, Arthur," I said, "you will not be picking me up. If you wish to discuss this, you may come here." There was a sputtering on the other end of the line, but he finally agreed. An hour later, the same sleek silver sedan tore up my driveway, kicking up gravel. This time they didn't look like a hostile negotiating team. They looked like defendants on their way to sentencing. Arthur's face was pale and sweaty. Brenda looked even worse. Her expensive makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes or the frantic terror that had taken root there. The crisp, powerful woman in the white pantsuit was gone, replaced by a desperate, unraveling mess. They practically burst through the front door. Charles was already here, sitting quietly in his usual armchair, a silent pillar of support. His presence threw them off. "What's he doing here?" Brenda snapped, pointing a trembling finger at Charles. "Mr. Blackwood is here as my advisor," I said coolly, gesturing for them to sit on the sofa, "since this is a financial matter." They sat perched on the edge of the cushions, vibrating with anxiety. "Mom, we don't have time for this," Arthur began, wringing his hands. "The bank manager is waiting. We have the papers right here." He threw a folder onto the coffee table. It landed with a slap that echoed in the quiet room. I didn't look at it. I looked directly at my son. "Arthur," I began, my voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. "Several months ago, you and your wife came into this house and told me I was incompetent. You told me I was selfish. You tried to force me out of my home and take control of my life. You mocked my memories and my love for your father, and then you cut me off. You told me not to call you, and you left me in a silence that you hoped would break me." Arthur flinched, color rising in his pale cheeks. Brenda opened her mouth to say something, but I held up a hand and she fell silent. "I have honored your wishes," I continued. "I did not call. I stayed in my silence, and in that silence I had a great deal of time to think, and with Mr. Blackwood's help I had time to read. I have reacquainted myself with the terms of the Sterling Family Trust which your father established." I leaned forward slightly. "Specifically, Clause 12B, are you familiar with it?" From the blank, uncomprehending look on their faces, it was clear they were not. Charles spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative. "Clause 12B, he explained, makes any extraordinary distribution from the trust principal contingent upon Margaret's written consent. A consent that is explicitly tied to her well-being, her happiness, and her respected status within this family." The color drained from Arthur's face. Brenda stared, her mouth slightly agape as the gears slowly, horribly began to turn in her mind. "My signature," I said, bringing their attention back to me, "is not just an authorization of funds. It is a legal declaration. It is my testimony that you, my son, have treated me with love and respect. It is a statement that I am happy and secure." I let the words hang in the air for a long, heavy moment. So you see my problem, I finished, my voice laced with a sorrow that was deeper than any anger. You have made it impossible for me to sign those papers without committing perjury. The dam of their composure broke. No, Brie. NDA wailed, the sound ugly and raw. You can't do this, it's your money, it's his inheritance. It is not my money, I corrected her gently. It is the Sterling family legacy, and your father, Arthur, put safeguards in place to protect that legacy from people who would dishonor it. Arthur was on his feet now, pleading. Mom, please, I'm sorry, we were wrong, we'll do anything, we'll visit every week, we'll take you to dinner, just sign the papers. His apology was as hollow as his promises. He wasn't sorry for what he did, he was sorry he got caught, he was sorry there were consequences. It's too late for that, Arthur, I said, my heart aching for the boy he once was, but my resolve as hard as granite for the man he had become. You made your choice months ago when you slammed that door. You chose a life of shiny things over a life of substance. You chose your position over your family. You chose her. I gave a brief, dismissive glance at the sobbing Brenda, over your mother. I stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I will not sign. The life you built is your own responsibility. Now I believe you have somewhere to be. I turned and walked towards the window, looking out at my beautiful, peaceful garden. I heard Charles's firm voice behind me. I think you should go now. I heard shuffling, a choked sob from Brenda, and a final, desperate "Mom" from Arthur. I did not turn around. I listened to their footsteps retreating, the sound of the front door opening and closing with a soft click, and the frantic sound of their car speeding away down the driveway one last time. The reckoning was complete. Their perfect life was about to be crushed into dust. And in the quiet of my home, surrounded by the love of a good man and the strength he had left me, I felt no triumph. Only a profound, cleansing, and absolute peace. In the months that followed, Arthur and Brenda's world collapsed exactly as predicted. They lost the garish mansion, the fancy cars, the country club memberships. Their so-called friends, who were only ever attracted to the luster of their wealth, vanished overnight. I heard from a distant cousin that they were forced to move into a small, rented apartment across town. Arthur had to take a humiliating job in middle management at a company he once would have scoffed at. Their downfall was total, a story they say is still whispered about in the circles they fought so desperately to belong to. I never rejoiced in their ruin. There is no joy in watching your own child suffer, even if that suffering is a direct consequence of his own terrible choices. It was a tragedy. But it was a tragedy of their own making. They were so busy chasing a life that glittered, they forgot to build one that was gold. The lesson in all of this is a simple one, I think, but one that took me a lifetime to fully understand. True wealth is not held in a portfolio or measured in square footage. It's the quiet dignity of a life lived with integrity. It's the love you cultivate and the respect you earn. It's the strength you find in your own heart when the world tries to tell you that you are worthless. They tried to take my future, but in doing so, they only managed to forfeit their own.